Welcome to the Journos. I'm Peter Martin, and I'm delighted to say our guest this week, as well as Hugh MacDonald, we have John Greechan of the Edinburgh Evening News. Lots to talk about, and of course Scotland at the forefront of our minds. Can we finally create history and not only qualify for a major tournament, which we have, but can we get out of the group? That's something we'll be discussing. And where does Steve Clarke rank in the list of Scotland managers? As well as that, we'll talk about England. Can they finally win a major? Their first one since 1966. Is this a golden generation? Is it time for Rangers to embrace the Moneyball ethos as Philippe Clement tries to engineer Rangers closer to Celtic and, of course, going past them to try and win the title this season? And can you name the top 10 ballers who failed to live up to the hype in Scotland? That's just a few of the topics, and we'll also sneak in. John has a book, and it's called Revolution. And of course, Ange Postecoglou will get John's thoughts on that book. And I think on PLZ Soccer, if you keep your eyes and ears open, we'll give you the opportunity to win this at some point. So there we are. We're all in a good mood. Scotland are playing well. John, are we jumping the gun as we normally do in Scotland and say, listen, let's not just go there and take part, let's win it?
Well, I heard the First Minister yesterday making a comment about defending the title 4 years down the line. So does he know what Ali's Tartan Army was about? Don't go there. Listen, I think it's great. We're there. I think we should be looking to get out of the group stages because you forget how big the Euros are now. So this was always a bugbear for years. We should have been qualifying for the Euros these past few years because half of the teams in Europe get there. It's like, are you telling me we're not among the top half of the teams in Europe? So this should be our right now. And to get out of the group stages, the one we missed where Wales got through, it was almost harder to go through than go home at that point. So it was difficult last time. I think we should definitely be looking at it. And I love the way that he's doing things like playing England, playing France. Because you're going to have to play one of these teams in your group as well.
Yeah, I think that the thing though that would be the key to this, Hugh, is for everybody to understand where we are in the pecking order. You know, because as John mentioned there, he has emphasised, listen, if we want to see how far we can go, we've got to take a few defeats to learn from it. England, Spain, France, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's 3 consecutive defeats, but it's top drawer countries, and I think Scotland should look and say to themselves, well, it's the second tier group, the second level group
very
countries.
much so. That's and I think the pots, where we end up pot-wise, which is still up in the air, it makes the last 2 games, I mean, we've qualified, but the last 2 games are important. I would really want to win the last 2 games, stay in a higher pot. The 3 teams that will play, if you look at the Euros, admittedly, 10 months out, in fact, a wee bit shorter than 8 months out, you would say that France, England and Spain would be about 3 of the favourites because you've got, you're now in an era where Italy and I'm not going to say West Germany, Italy and Germany are not the formidable forces they once were. They've got time to the regroup before the competition kicks off in June. But the 3 teams we've played, along with Portugal, I think will be the 4 teams that'll be looking to win this competition.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you come up against a country like France, I mean, some of the journalists have been rather scathing in their assessment of where we are, but we don't need to be told we don't have any strikers. And I'm not being in any way, you know, dismissive of the qualities that Lyndon Dykes and maybe a Christie and what do you call it, Che Adams. They're grafters because you have to deal with the cards you've been dealt.
Yeah, I think there's very few international teams have the complete package, don't they? It's hard because you have to develop your own, and you're down to luck a lot of times. Nothing Steve Clarke can do. Nothing Steve Clarke can do to get a striker.
Yeah.
Apart from try and sign another one who maybe qualifies through the grandparent rule.
Yeah. John, I remember sitting in a restaurant in Edinburgh with him, and we were sitting there, and I said to him, how are you going to get right back? And he said, what about the centre halves? And then eventually we talked about strikers as well, but he had 2 half-decent left-backs, you know, 2 half-decent left-backs, 2 fantastic left-backs, and then a plethora of midfielders.
Yeah, that seems to be our strength at the moment. Listen, we'd all hope for someone to turn up between now and then, but I say there's, with the exception of the very top nations, the very ones who they get a bit lucky as well, but have these massive play numbers, the teams we're going to face won't be perfect as well. You inevitably find it's a big country and you go, there's left backs playing in the second tier somewhere, or he's a championship player at centre half, and so we're going to face similar opposition when we get there. I think you make a good point. We're in that second tier. I think we will have learned a lot, and I remember Steve Clarke saying it at the end of the last Euros. He said, we've learned from this experience. He's learned as a coach how to do that 3-game spell and how to manage your squad. The players have been through it, they've learned, so I think we'll be better this time regardless of personnel. But yeah, you'd love a centre forward somewhere to suddenly start banging them in.
Spain would love a centre forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what they've got Morata, but they don't like playing Morata because Morata doesn't press. And there's always a big argument in Spain, right? He'll give you a goal. Classic thing was a game I was at with Germany, Spain, and I'll buy it at the World Cup, where they didn't look like scoring. They brought Morata on, he scores, but Germany scored because they bring Morata on, because Morata didn't close down Schlotterbeck.
Yeah.
So, it's that swings and roundabouts. So every team, I would say, with the possible exception of France, I think France are strong in if you talk about the area being 3 compartments, defence, midfield and attack, I think you can make a case for France being strong in all 3 and possibly up front, superb in all 3. But even England, I mean, I think England, there's holes that England would like to fill, particularly centre back, and I think goalkeeper as well.
Yeah, we're going to touch on them in a moment. I was going to get your thoughts. Obviously, we understand, and I think John makes that point that there are weaknesses in nations where they are clamouring for somebody in a central defensive role or somebody to score the goals for them. I was looking at the Scotland side and what potentially could be his strongest, gun and goal, Hickey, Porteous, Tierney and Robertson, Gilmour, McGregor, McGinn, McTominay, and then it's Christie and Dykes. Here's the difference. I mean, obviously, that could change every now and then from a Patterson breaking in, a Billy Gilmour as well. But the one element of it that I think might just change his mindset and might change sometimes the way he plays is if suddenly Ben Doak could get 10 or 11 games suddenly for Liverpool, and then we're heading to Germany with him as an option. I genuinely think, because we've got such a dearth of talent, Doak's the type of boy that you could maybe play in behind a Dykes.
Yeah, I think so. And also, he still he goes back to every now and again this 3-4-2-1 with McGinn and Christie, or McGinn and another in support of a striker. And Ben Doak in that kind of second number 10 position, whether he's supporting the striker, would be great. I think it's been a recurring problem for Scotland over years of not putting our younger players in soon enough at times. And you watch the very best nations will throw their best player. They're just like, I'll tell you what, you're not playing 21s. You're going to come play for the first team. Now, of course, you're right, he needs to get maybe 10 games for Liverpool under his belt first. But everyone you speak to at Liverpool raves about Ben Doak. Everyone you speak to within the coaching world who's had sessions, who's been at sessions, says that the kid, he's definitely the real deal. Now, we've said this before, we might come to this later.
Yeah.
Players that we think are the real deal, but I think he's reached an age and a stage now where we want to see him play first team football. I mean, I would want to put him in that Scotland team for these last 2 qualifiers. If he's available and the 21s maybe don't need him, you got to prioritise the first team. Say, well, we want him ready for next summer.
The 21s are there for. The only reason you have a 21s is to produce players for the national team.
We want him there next summer.
Scott Gemmell's raving about him, so he must be saying to him, listen.
The last time I talked to Scott Gemmell player was Billy Gilmour, and he said, but the interesting thing about Doak is people say, will he be ready, etc. And that's fine. But the Euros, as we see, are 8 months away. 6 months ago, I was walking up, I think it would be about 6 months ago, I was walking up to Easter Road to watch Hibs v Borussia Dortmund's underage team, and I met Jackie McNamara, who of course knows Doak so well, and I said to him, what about this Doak? And he says he'll start for Liverpool's first team next season.
Yeah.
And my son and I went, Jackie? He said, no, he'll get a start for it. He says there's no question about it, he'll start. So 6 months ago, it was almost preposterous to suggest that Doak would start. Now we know he has done that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what he could do in the next 8 months, who knows?
But see, in the game against Spain, I watched Spain bring on the number 10 Brian. And I'm looking at him saying, now he's just ghosted past 2 players, playing as a 10 but off the left side. And I'm thinking, Ben Doak could easily come into that equation. And by the way, John, when was the last time you could think of us having someone who can square up a player and beat him for skill?
Aye, it's a magic ability, what they call them, the eliminators in football, don't they? The guys that no matter what system you're playing, no matter how you're doing it, you're trying to create, you either create a numerical advantage, you create a technical advantage. He's got a technical advantage over almost every defender he meets. I think it's interesting, again, we talk about needing the clubs on board. I go way back to late Tommy Burns when he was assistant to Bertie, and I remember we were out at Dumbarton one day, and because things were terrible with the Scotland team at that time, but they were bringing players in. And he said, you don't need to tell us that they're not ready for international football. But they're not getting European football with their clubs. They're not getting a lot of games. We need to make them ready. So they were going through this pain.
Yes.
And we're in a much stronger position now to be able to bring a player in. And I think if you go back to the last Euros, everyone now looks back in hindsight and says, should have started Billy Gilmour in the first game. Didn't he start Billy Gilmour in the first game?
Yeah, but that, I mean, we're always after the fact, aren't we?
I know.
When we
But
can
at the
slaughter
time, there was a lot of
somebody.
people saying, why isn't Gilmour starting this game? Because he's such a good footballer. And listen, you give it to the coach because the coach sees them in training. He knows what their numbers have been, for whether they can last 60 minutes or not. He'll make these decisions, but I would love to see Ben Doak in these last two games. Just bring in the squad, even if he's just on for half an hour.
And I think crucial to all this is one of the great things about Clark is Clark's a learner, and he's been a learner all his life, and he's got lessons from great coaches. But and I thought it was really interesting after what we must say was disappointing Euro finals. He came out right away and he said, "Listen, I made mistakes. I've got to learn from this." And it's obvious what mistakes he thinks he's made because he's bringing in players quicker. He changed the formation. He took the McTominay playing in a back three thing. Just went, no, I'm not having that anymore. I see the reasons why I tried to do it, but it's not worked. And then he got the added bonus of not only McTominay being technical good in it, but absolutely been spectacular in that role.
One thing I would say though is, as journalists and fans, everybody's going to have an opinion. You talked about the Gilmour situation. He should have played. Whether he should have played or he shouldn't have. I think the ultimate thing is the trust in the manager who's in the job, because De Zerbi didn't play Gilmour at a time because he watched him and he said, you're going to have to almost, understand. First of all, the way I play, and then you're going to have to understand that the possession, the pace, what we do with it, not to give it away. And Gilmour clearly had to battle because, that jumping onto the scene at Chelsea and everybody raving about him is one thing, but you've got to get to a consistent basis where you're regularly playing. And I think Clark has shown that, there are certain players. I mean, I thought Hickey, 2 years ago, Hugh, we were all on this programme saying, no, come on, you don't want to play for the 21s, get stuffed, But that boy had the tremendous belief, certainly the team that were behind him, a tremendous belief that he could play at a higher level and he was worthy of starting in the main squad. We can still debate the way he went about it, but look at Hickey.
I think the best players don't have to play 21s. If they're not ready, and just if they're that good and they're that young.
I agree with you. I think there's a great stat about top Champions League players that that if you're playing for, let's say, a last 8 Champions League team or a team that's got pretensions to win the Champions League, you will have made your debut in the Champions League by 18. I think it's like 90% of them have made their debut in the Champions League at 18, or maybe even sometimes 17 in the case of some Barcelona players. But so that thing, if you're good enough, age doesn't matter. I think the interesting thing as well about the Scottish team it's been formed through a bit of trauma. I'm talking about trauma in a sporting sense, and the knockbacks and stumbles on the road, and that goes for the manager who has had his ups and downs in coaching, has also had his ups and downs with Scotland, and so has learned from that. But every player in that team, you can put just about every player in the team. McTominay's probably an exception. You can put a big question mark over, Robertson, thrown out at Celtic, Hickey the same, Callum McGregor goes to Notts County, Lyndon Dykes, goodness knows how he got into international football. And the point I'm eventually getting to, Billy Gilmour, because I actually think what's happened to Gilmour over the last 2 seasons has probably been extraordinarily painful for him and his connections. Because remember, he's been a golden boy since he was 6 years of age.
Yeah.
And suddenly he wasn't. And him coming through that will make him a much better, stronger personality, better player than he might have done if he'd had this sort of free run.
We've got a better bench coming along now as well, which is good. So on that point, just as briefly to finish then, is that the strongest team, give or take 1 or 2, for you?
I think so. I think, and I know it'll get a lot of stick for this, I think Stuart Armstrong always does something.
Yeah.
And depending on what level he's playing at and how much he's playing, I get why Steve Clarke likes him. He carries the ball.
Yeah.
He carries the ball upfield, and sometimes when you're under pressure, that's why he loves Christie as well, isn't it? Somebody's just going to carry the ball and get you out of danger.
Yeah.
Give yourself a breathing space. But fairly strong. I like Shea Adams as well.
Yeah. Shea Adams is why I like him, and I like Dykes, because if you come off the park and you say, okay, he didn't score, depending on the result, you're looking at saying, that boy's grafted for you. He's absolutely given everything. I mean, they're knackered. I'd love to see the Fitbit stats.
But the interesting thing about that team is that if you go through that team and say that is the best team, and it's unarguable, and we know there's always arguments about the best team, but because of that team, you say, well, we've got Liam Kelly in reserve. We might have Craig Gordon back for our goalkeeper.
Yep.
At full back, we've got Patterson. At centre back, we've got
McKenna and Hendry.
And Cooper as well. Midfield, you just add in Armstrong, Ferguson, a Serie A player.
Yeah. It's a good shout with Ferguson.
And Christie. Up front, okay, but there's a chance for up front. I would like to see. I know Shanklin's had by his standards, a very becalmed season, probably a different role he's playing. There's a chance for Shanklin and Nisbet and any other to come into, and I think Doak is a must. I think I don't care what he does in the next 5 or 6 months. I think you get him on the plane.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, absolutely. Just one little bit here, and it's always difficult. It's what we call our pub argument, John. Sorry, I don't have a pint of beer for you, or your usual Pernod and Blackburn. But I looked at the managers, and obviously, we can't go back to the 50s and the World Cup tournament the way it was then. I've gone from 1974 onwards,
right,
which is obviously when I thought, when I was growing up as a boy, that we always qualified for World Cups. But this is the European Championships. I'm looking Willie Ormond, Ali McLeod, Jock Stein, Alex Ferguson, Andy Roxburgh, Craig Brown, Bertie Votes, Walter Smith, Alex McLeish, George Burley, Craig Levine, Gordon Strachan, and of course McLeish's second time. I haven't included people who've been there in a caretaker role, because I think that's totally and utterly not only unfair but pointless to our argument here. Where does Clarke rank?
It's really hard, because international managers, more than club managers, are shaped by circumstance. Famously, you can't go out and sign players. You've got to work with what you've got. I think it's almost daft trying to rank them. They all play an important role, and some managers are transformative. I think they play important parts. So Walter Smith restored a degree of respect and respectability, at a difficult time when we'd had to come through a lot of growing pains there without qualifying. There's some very good managers on there who've done great work without qualifying, because qualifying's hard. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, Andy Roxburgh still right up there. Craig Brown for what he. I mean. Yeah. I think we realised after he'd gone how good Craig Brown was, and all the things that we talk about now about creating a club atmosphere and getting this.
Managed his resources.
Yeah. Craig did all the time, didn't he?
I don't want to put it in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I think he's in the top 5 though.
Oh, aye. Brown's. I think.
I mean, Steve Clarke, but Brown's definitely.
Steve Clarke.
Top 5.
Oh, definitely top 3, maybe top 1. I mean,
back-to-back qualifications. It's easier now. It is easier now to get into the Euros, but still.
I think Johnny makes the perfect point that you could be the greatest manager in the world and you could finish with a team bottom of the pot. It could be Pep Guardiola. He's not going to qualify with San Marino. So you are shaped by what you have. And But I think what raises both Brown and Steve Clarke high up the list for me is that they adapted to circumstance. I mean, Craig Brown went in and said, and you look back at his qualifying campaigns, which I was there as a punter rather than a journalist at the time.
Yeah.
And he said, this is the way I'm going to play my team because we're strong defensively. We're not going to lose goals. Now, we're never going to tank a team, but we're going to win ones and twos, and that's how we're going to go through. And when you look at the table at the end of the qualifying campaign, you'll see in 12 games or whatever, many games, we've lost 6 goals or 8 goals.
And I used to sit next to him at the PFA,
Oh,
Hugh,
goodness.
and I'd say to him, by the way, Craig, I'm not going to be two-faced about it. See, when you were getting us to the World Cup, I says, our whole fraternity slaughtered you. Because we did. We used to say they were boring, didn't we?
I do remember a game where I think he had 6 centre-halves on the pitch.
No.
The entire back 5 plus Colin Calderwood and the holding midfield. Because he had Davy Weir on right wing back and Christian Daly at left wing back in the back 3. You're like, oof, but it worked. It worked.
Absolutely.
And I think Steve Clarke, in fact, I know Steve Clarke is that about him, because we've referenced that earlier in the programme, that he's managed to adapt. And the great thing about it is this up here, he's changing his mind all the time. If he says something, he doesn't say, well, I've decided that's right. He said, well, I've decided that's right. And you know what? I don't think it is now. And that's a great thing to have in life, never mind as a football manager.
The other thing I like about him is he's part of a group of managers that you come across in life that he's a no-nonsense. There's not any kind of a dubiety of what he's about. He's straight-laced. He doesn't tolerate things like that. His stance in sectarianism was firm, resolute, and he stood by the way he wanted his teams to play. And of course, as you say, it's that flexibility to say, okay, I'm not going to make definitive decisions on certain people. They can suddenly come back in. I thought Ryan Fraser was gone, and then and then all of a sudden. He brought him back in because he's not going to discard anybody. Yeah. So I like the way he goes about his business. I also like him as a person as well. So I think we're in a good place with it. Whether we can get out of that group, do you get a feeling? I mean, it's hypothetical because we don't know who we're going to be in against. But when you look at the way they play the football, John.
Yeah, I think you got to look at experience as key. And you mentioned it as well. Steve's been through his own ups and downs as a manager, but experience just teaches the smart ones. Teaches so much. You'll get some managers go right through for 40 years as a manager, never change anything about it, and but he's had experience, and I think that there's almost nothing that is thrown at him that he hasn't seen before.
Yeah,
that makes the difference. He was like, well, this is a wee bit like that, and what did I do then? And actually, that was a mistake when I did it that way. I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
So he's got it there. So I think, depending on the draw, we could end up. I think we'll end up. We'll inevitably get the group of death, won't they? It'll
absolutely.
Be Italy, England, or France, England, and they'll bring Brazil into the Euros just for us.
Just to annoy us.
Yeah.
I think we're good enough to get out of the group. I would love to be pot 2, and I think the squad's just a nice stage at the moment as well, settled, good experience, and we've got to remember, this thing about Little Scotland. If you look at that team is full of top class players. We know we've got the little lacunas, the little areas where we don't have Champions League players at centre back, but in midfield and then up front. But we're so strong in midfield, so strong wide as well. That I think we should be looking to get out of the group.
The one caution is when you get there is that every team has something in there. I always think is it the movie Bull Durham when he's talking to the young rookie about going up to the major leagues, and he said, everyone's got a killer curveball. Every pitcher you face can hit 100, everyone can hit this. You reach that stage where you go, right, this is great, we've got a really strong team, and then you look at them and go, actually, tell you what, their left wingers terrifying.
Yeah,
so it is a great standard of football, much higher standard.
And another thing about it is if a team's got, we saw with Gareth Bale, if a team's got an absolute worldie, they can go, and I'm talking worldies, they can go very far. If we've got decent players serving him, actually working to play for him, to play for themselves, if you know what I mean. I think international football is we could even do a programme on it. It's a really intriguing thing because it's miles below Champions League football in quality. We know that because every Champions League footballer is an internationalist. Not every internationalist is a Champions League footballer. So there's a lot more necessity of a coach having a quick, agile mind. There's a lot more about players you'll find in that team, for example, although they would never say it. You'll find Andy Robertson and Tierney and McTominay and everyone. They'll know that they're not playing with the players or training with players of the quality that they do every week.
Yeah.
So there's adjustments for them as well.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed on it. Last couple of games, can we win them? I think we can win both.
I really want to win both. These are not friendlies, and Clark knows this. There's a prize at the end of this. If we win these, not only momentum-wise, but get into that second pot, it could make all the difference.
Can we win them?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, again, there is a danger sometimes if you're talking about England that, we're guilty of xenophobia and maybe that whole anti-English situation. So I'll start it off and say to you that I'm looking at this golden generation, and again I qualify that by saying you have to distance yourself sometimes from the hype that surrounds an England team, but they have a really good side with a guy who's got the potential now to go on to become world class in Bellingham.
Absolutely.
And I know there are people saying he's world class right now, but for God's sake, give the boy time to actually cement his position. I'm looking at their side, and just going back to what you were saying, as I look at England, I'm thinking, can they eventually win that major that they've been craving since 1966? And I still think they're a wee bit short.
Well, the interesting thing about it is, they're talking about this golden generation. My first observation was the last golden generation won nothing. And the last golden generation,
2002.
they won nothing. And we all talked about, they had Terry and Ferdinand, they had Lampard, Scholes and Gerrard, they had Shearer. I mean, through the years they've had, top players and they won nothing. So I think though people wouldn't say it, there's still a mentality problem there, I think, just slightly about confidence. I think if you watch them in big games, you always think, or I always think anyway, when I've watched them at World Cups in Europe, they're going to find a way to get beat here. And I think most famously in the Euro final against Italy, when they were really well on top, and they allowed Italy to turn it around. And once they went to penalties, they just said, I'm putting you put the kettle on for that.
Yeah.
What's going to happen there? But having said that, I think they're strong favourites. I think they're strong contenders. France would be the team I would pick if somebody's gone to head France, and I would have a wee sneaking suspicion that Portugal will do well. But if you say about England for the years, of course they're contenders. Where are their fallibilities? I think goalkeeper, centre half, and a manager. That's my three.
Yeah, I know you're not a big fan of Gareth Southgate. I like Gareth Southgate. I like him as a man. I like the way he's gone about his business. He's kind of gone through. We mentioned sometimes, the difficult periods and how Tommy Burns, you talked about there with Bertie Votes and that transitional period where we're throwing caps out like sweeties. But I think he's managed to kind of not so much control them, but certainly put a lid on the erratic nature of our compatriots in the press down south, because they could be scathing towards England managers. I mean, at times you actually winced when you read the papers, turnips on the head. Bobby Robson got battered in 1986 for England, and they slaughtered them. And for me, Sir Bobby Robson is up there as one of the best England managers since Sir Alf Ramsey. So they got slaughtered. But if you look at the generations where we're talking about golden generations, I mean, you've rhymed off a few of them there, but they'd David Seaman, Sol Campbell, Ferdinand, Ashley Cole, absolutely top drawer. Gary Neville was there, Martin Keown. And then if you looked, even Ledley King was there, albeit the injuries that dogged him. Paul Scholes, Beckham, top drawer. Owen Hargreaves was there, Joe Cole was there, Frank Lampard.
Gerrard.
And then you'd Michael Owen, you'd Gerrard, Emile Heskey, who I thought was a really good player, Teddy Sheringham. I mean, they had good players, so that's their golden generation. The best side.
Golden generation that won sod all.
Sod all.
They got knocked out of the group stages in Euro 2000.
Absolutely, but I mean, John, the best England side I've seen since 1966 is Sir Bobby Robson's in 1980 because he's a world-class player.
Yeah,
I mean, Gascoigne was absolutely at the peak of his powers for me.
They did everything.
What a team!
These utility players like David Platt, who never gets a mention now, who was a terrific player.
He played in Italy.
He was a terrific player,
Yeah.
but doesn't get a mention. I just think, I'm interested to hear about John things. I just think, John knows much more about tactics and setups. The big thing, I think Gareth Southgate is a very agreeable man and a very commendable man as well. I mean, but I've never seen him change a game. That's my problem with him. I've never seen mid-match saying, you know what, it's one each at the moment and we're in this. Let's do something and win it. And I've never seen that. I don't know if...
Yeah, they're quite inflexible in how they play. This is how we play and this is how we play. But I also think, you go back to like the press and the fans and things like that, I think they get bored. Well, we got bored with Craig Brown. This is boring. We're qualifying all the time, but it's boring. They get bored. They get bored with Gareth Southgate. And you got to remember, England are a qualifying machine now. They never don't qualify. It's just like bang, bang, bang. It's a matter of course. The trouble they have is getting people interested in the games at Wembley.
But do you not contest what Hugh's saying, John? I mean, he said, he doesn't make changes. Well, he must have done some changes. Semi-final lost to Croatia, lost in the final to Italy, and knocked out by France in the quarter-finals. I mean, come on.
There's always been some sort of flaw there. I remember the Croatia game in particular, and it was Roy Keane was on there and telling it as it is. And they lose these late goals, and he goes, but I don't know why we're surprised. It was John Stones and whoever else, Harry Maguire, and he's like, we see them do that every week in the Premier League.
Yeah.
They switch off, they lose a goal. That's it. So they've always had holes. I think they're good enough to win it this time. I think they are. I think I'm in that rush to call Jude Bellingham. I think Jude Bellingham can win you the tournament. I think he is unbelievable. Now, staying fit, staying in form, he's had a lot to deal with. The way he's taken to life at Real Madrid is just ridiculous. But you do wonder with a young player that at some point it just has an effect and something goes wrong and they don't have the experience to deal with it.
The Rooney syndrome, where everybody had the whole nation was Rooney's got to be fit, and then in Portugal, in the game against Portugal, suddenly, somebody stands on his foot.
Yeah, or I mean, everyone's been watching that Beckham documentary. Beckham had that idea as well, and suddenly you do something stupid and you get. The young players just don't have that experience to deal with it. And if you're building your hope around him, I still think Harry Kane is one of the, if not the best number 9 in the world. Yeah, he plays it totally different from the way a Giroud or
you can come short and join up. You can go beyond.
And by the way,
striker. On Bellingham, just one observation. But I followed Bellingham obviously because he's a Dortmund player.
He loves Bellingham,
and I've loved him since. Me and Ali went and saw him, and he was like, I think he just turned 17. Okay, it wasn't a World Cup or a Euros, but it was a Bundesliga game, top level, and we looked at each other, never said a word. About half an hour in, going, he's lying about his. I want to see his passport. 17, and Dortmund put him in the Champions League at 17. So he's had 3. He's actually. There's a lot of mileage on the clock for him. He's a really experienced player.
Yeah.
And the other thing about him is there's a bit of nastiness about him in the right way. He's very arrogant in the proper way. He knows how good he is and he demands things of players. He's very sure of himself. You can even see the way he carries himself. He's very sure of himself. And I love that. I love a player like that. Yeah. I just think, for me, and I watched a rerun of him the other night, I just think, goodness gracious, if you take age out of this guy's arrived for me.
Yeah, I think he's also got that, you say that nastiness, he knows it's not enough wanting to win, you have to want the other guy to lose as well. And he loves it. He loves, I'm going to torment you tonight. He looks at his opponent, not tonight, I'm going to kill you.
So you think they'll win with Bellingham driving them to it?
I think they've got certainly a very good chance up there. I think they're probably equal favourites with France. Bearing in mind, things can go wrong. They always seem to find a way for things to go wrong. Yeah. They don't see games out sometimes when it's the big game. You made that point about the final. And I wonder if that's the management. I wonder if it's lack of bench. I don't know what it is.
I'm going to take you to task on it and flip around what you said earlier, which is basically you said, for Scotland, when you get there and all of a sudden you say, well, we look okay, but they've got somebody who can hit a curveball. And I think the one weakness, I think they're definitely going to make the semi-finals. But the one weakness is if there is an opposition that has something in the forward line that's good, The back line is where I think the weakness is, and that is the bit that I think will deny them the ultimate.
That's what I said. Goalie, the back, like we used to do with Aberdeen, Leighton, McLeish and Miller being their back three. They've not got back three.
No.
And I think Maguire thing, and everybody's piling on him. It's a shame for the guy. But Maguire made his name as an 18-yard centre-half that headed the ball away and blocked crosses. International football now, and they all know it. Champions League football now, you see when Maguire gets the ball from his goalkeeper, my goodness, it's like it's just a swarm of bees coming, because what's happening? Top class teams want him to have the ball, and that is
the shape to get it.
It's shaped him, and you have, and that is a problem you cannot overcome.
Here's your inflexibility as well, because Southgate's backed himself into a corner, and because he feels for the guy and the loyalty, he's backing him right or wrong. And now if he drops him for a big game in the finals, it becomes a big thing. And Gareth's thrown him under the bus.
But I do think
it should just be, I'm picking who my best player is.
His weakness is not just about the fact that there might be a swarm of bees all going around him. His weakness for me is his positional sense in the box, and that's where he gets found out. Just for a bit of nostalgia, by the way, just on the basis of golden generations since that, 66, and we look and we say, well, the 70s team, even with Keegan, made a complete back end of qualifying for any tournaments. But that 1990 team was Shilton, Butcher, Parker and Pearce, Walker, Mark Wright, Gascoigne, Platt, Waddle, Beardsley and Lineker. Now, Waddle alone was one of my favourite players, never mind Gascoigne, who was a genius. And then you had Trevor Stephen, on the bench as well, who could come on and do some damage. And they had Stephen McMahon as well, and John Barnes. It was just a brilliant side.
But again, when you look back at these games, if you look back clinically at England games, I mean, the game that they lost the World Cup through against Argentina in '86, that was down to the manager. Great manager and all that, but there was a managerial mistake there, because what Argentina did was play three at the back, but played narrow so they had one extra man in midfield so that Maradona could do what Maradona wanted. But at left, out in the wing, there was cows grazing out in the wing. There was that much space. The whole thing caught. I remember watching it. Get Barnes on. Barnes eventually comes on and almost rescues the match for them in 10 minutes. So they always that way. What I say about Gareth is that if you look at the three crucial games, Croatia, Italy and France, if you're watching them as a neutral, which I am, I've got no animus against England, absolutely none against them. I'm watching, I said, these are three games they could and probably should have won. And they lost all three. Not one, not two, all three. And I think that's telling.
Okay, a couple of points. Obviously, I want to cram into the show. As you say, Hugh, at times we could make a programme out of one topic. Clement, Rangers manager, now he's got the chance to try and implement the four qualities, the pillars that he's talking about for Rangers: the best physical team, the best technical team, the best tactical team, the best mental team. Well, he might be able to do that, in his mind, but he doesn't have the best financial team there to back that up. He's inherited a squad that is not his, has been absolutely filleted right across the board. And he's going to have to try and get a trick out of them all the way to the January transfer window. And then he's going to find out if he's got any money to try and juggle and hope that he's kept them on the tail of Celtic, John.
Yeah, well, the first thing you do is make sure those players stay on side. We all remember, you never go full Terry Butcher when he arrived at Hibs and said, I'd like to get rid of 12 of them. And he still had 6 weeks to go at the transfer window and wondered why they didn't play for him. And he was being honest. The squad was in a terrible way. So you don't do that. Once he gets that transfer window, I know you wanted to mention about analytics and Moneyball. There's no way to get an advantage anymore. Everyone does it. Everyone's got a good analysis department. I've done a few courses with the SFA and UEFA, and you speak to these analysis people, and they all know how to sift the data. And it's not just a computer game. The data leads them to video, leads them to go watch the player. They don't do anything. It's not like just picking a guy off a graph.
Well, have they got a blind side then on that? Let's just say everybody, as you say, is on Moneyball or a variation of it, right, for the data. Have they got a blind side towards homegrown players that they maybe should have pushed the boat out on?
Well, that's really difficult. Again, these are the things. Again, data doesn't tell you. Right? So data doesn't tell you who they're playing against and what they are. You could go and pick. I'm sure that there's been a few signings in Scottish football, and I've heard people say the numbers were really great on him, and then you realise he was playing in the Norwegian second division, and there's a big drop off between that first and second division. In terms of domestic players, sometimes there is just this blind side. Well, if he was any good, he wouldn't be playing at that club. And you often hear it, he's not Rangers quality. He's not Celtic quality.
There's three players, John, I'm going to throw at you right now. Shanklin, Nisbet and Ferguson.
Yep.
That's three players they should have had.
Ferguson's the one. Again, and given that the family connection, how that didn't happen. It's just, maybe he desperately wanted to go and do something different, but I think it wouldn't have been that hard, would it?
Wouldn't have been that hard to give them £1 million.
And we've seen it. I remember the great one was with Celtic with John McGinn as well. And I remember at Hibs at the time, and they were just playing on the whole, he's a Celtic fan, he'll come here. Speaking to someone at Hibs, was like, somebody in England's going to come in and offer double the salary, and then Celtic fan or not, he's going. So the two big clubs have been guilty of that in the past. I think Rangers have got, as we all know, they've got major restructuring to do in their major rebuilding. Plus, he may go in and see some of these players and think, actually, even the new ones that haven't hit the ground, you just need time. You just need another. I'll get you in the next 6 weeks. I'll get you ready. And,
6 weeks is a long time in Scottish football.
That's an interesting thing what he said. I'll need a bit of time, and you go, well, the last two managers have been sacked after 10 months. I think maybe the Rangers have perhaps learned their lesson in that. They say, certainly learned the lesson in how you go about recruitment. This is a good, no matter what happens, because we don't know, this is a sensible recruit. I mean, this is a recruit where you can say to yourself, you look down, you look at the figures, you look at clips of the way his team's played, you look at his background and say, he might end up being an absolute failure in Scottish football because football works that way. It's just, and what is a failure? A failure will be finishing consistently second to Celtic, which in financial terms is a very hard one to sort of slough off. But they've actually went and they've got a manager, they've got a coach who's got a CV, who's got a way of playing, and is willing, it seems at the moment, to work under the constraints that will be there. I think he's got. All the pillars is great at press conferences and all that, but if you actually go down to the bottom thing, what has he got to do? He's got to get a tune out of who's there.
Yes. And can I play the Terry Butcher role for 2 minutes here? Because I actually thought to myself, okay, I'll give you a quick summary of where he's going with this squad that he's inherited. So Yilmaz needs to stay fit or he's out. Suter could be a summer casualty. He just can't cement himself on that side. Golson, a change is coming. Davis, limited appearances on the horizon. Balogun, why did they bring him back? I have no clue. Barisic, gone in the summer. Leon King, not good enough. Sterling, I don't know what he does. Ryan Jack, he'll be away in a free in the summer. Stephen Davis, brilliant player that he was. Legs gone. Time to coach. Might play elsewhere to keep his international caps going. Tom Lawrence, question over fitness. Todd Cantwell, he's got a part to play, but they won't build a team around him. That's a cert. Lammers gone. Cifuentes, a year max. Matondo, outside chance if he can work with him. Scott Wright, gone. Raskin, definite chance. Seema is a lone player. Dessers, 50-50. Kemar Roof, end of season, gone because he's always injured. Hadji, I think they'll sell him. Lowry, I think they'll move him on. And Danilo, I'm afraid the jury's out because he, every time I see him, I keep thinking, have they signed Serginho from the 1982 squad from Brazil? I'm sorry, but he hasn't done enough to convince me.
Yeah, I think there's, we talk about time and managers not getting time, players don't get time, but if you go back, I'm going back to Walter Smith being manager, and he gave players 6 months. I mean, remember he signed Kevin Thompson, so we talk about players coming from other teams. And Kevin Thompson almost didn't play that. I think they signed him in January and almost didn't play the second half of that season.
Yeah.
And then played the start of the next season. And he did that with players, did that with Whittaker as well, I think, when he brought him in. He says, because it's just a mind melt when you come into a club like Rangers. It's really difficult to do.
Yeah.
So, but you're right, though, he's got an experience as a coach. He's got a foundation, a body at work. I think also managers coming in, it's a free hit for them, you know?
Yeah.
Because see, if it doesn't work, it's not going to have any reputational damage for him at all. He just goes back to wherever he goes and goes,
Yeah, but
bin fire. Aye, couldn't make it work.
I can't believe, John, that they're actually talking and they're debating over whether, he's going to keep Tavernier or not. Tavernier's a top scorer. He's scored 107 goals, Hugh. If I was looking at a firing line here, he's at number 9. I mean, for God's sake, they're making a B. I don't know why they've got a B in their bonnet about this boy. This is a right back who scored 107 goals, Hugh.
He's also a right back, can't defend, Peter.
No, that's fine, but at the end of the day, he's not. He's part of us. The supporting cast is well below
I
what
agree.
he's producing.
I agree. If anybody narrows the problems at Rangers down to Tavernier, I think they're doing. And I'm not his greatest fan. You know that.
Absolutely.
I just don't. I just don't think he's a right back. I think that's his problem. But whether he's a right wing back or a right winger, I don't know.
You can be a right back if you just play, your right system and you make sure you've got cover for him.
And that's been the problem for, and he's also his concentration's all over the place, certainly defensively. But I think where's the hopes if you were a Rangers daft and you're saying where's the positives, Clement coming in? I think you've got a coach who's got a CV. He's not going to go out there and be have any problems about taking a team. He's also coached at a really high level and won at a high level. Can he get a tune out of players? Because we tend to forget that one great thing about a really good coach is he comes into a club and somebody who you think is not a very good player suddenly go, oh, he's good. And I think that, Brendan Rodgers famously did that when he came to Celtic. I think he improved Scott Brown, who was not the end of the... I think he improved Scott Brown tremendously and other players in the team. Postecoglou did the same with Greg Taylor, for example. There's a multitude of others he did it for. So managers can get a tune out of players that, could he make a Dessers suddenly? Oh, God, or a Lam or some,
If he simplifies the game for them and he says, I don't want you trying to do everything. I want you to do this.
Yes.
And the third thing, I think, he's got the League Cup. Now, if he wins the League Cup, which he should win on budgets and all that, they've got Hearts in semi, it'll be a tough game, and they'll have whatever happens in the other semi, they'll have a team really up for it in the final. But if he wins that League Cup, that gives them time. That gives them, there'll be a feel-good. Rangers have won some, there's another trophy there. There'll be an intake of breath. So if you were positive, there are possibilities there.
Yeah.
But the point is, they're second best in a city where you've got to be first.
Yes. And my reasoning for suggesting that he might find it difficult even after that, I still think the biggest decision as a director of football and investment is the fact that for all his qualities, for me, he's up against a top coach with a bank balance
of 70
that could
million.
sink the Titanic.
70 million.
Yeah, and growing. So it's going to be a tough job. Before we get to the top 10 ballers who failed to live up to the hype in Scotland, I always like a
Peter Martin.
I like a wee top 5 or top...
Peter Martin, because I saw you do that penalty chip in that charity game, right? That Panenka.
Yeah.
And you said to that, he's wasted his career. How did it all go wrong for Peter Martin?
Well, I'll tell you, because he just mentioned that Bertie Votes never capped me, because there were people getting cabs in. I thought,
well below you.
Chance. But listen, before we get to that, I want to give this a mention, John, because Ange Postecoglou, the man, the methods and the mastery, it's called Revolution. I think from our point of view, obviously, when we get the copy of it, we're going to give it away as a prize. Can I just say before you give us a wee insight into it, that most of the people that I've spoken to who were at the coaching course in London, he shared everything with them. And his philosophy was, as well as me giving you everything, there's no magic wand to it. There's no secret formula. This is the way I do it. But that's me.
Yes.
And he says, I don't care if you've got I'm giving you the blueprint, but I'm Ange Postecoglou, and there are things that you will never be able to replicate, but if I can help you by sharing it, on you go.
Yeah, that's really very common in football. It's within coaching circles. I've done some coaching badges over the years, and I was astonished the amount of people that just told me things. Do this, and you're like veterans, and you go, "What you just given me?" But you would, you see someone keen, you want to help, and he's brilliant that way. He believes in what he does, right? And that is the first thing I had to explain this to so many Spurs fans. When they signed, I said, look, he's not going to change for the Premier League. Don't be daft. He believes in this, and it's not a gamble to him. The way he plays isn't a gamble. Every coach is looking for that 51 to 55% chance of winning a game.
Yeah.
Right? If two teams are fairly, we'll just give us the edge. This is the way he does it. He plays this way. This is the way of football. But he says, if you don't believe in it, don't try and play it. You can't. You can't, because sooner or later, there'll be a tight game where you revert to type. You go, right, actually we're playing 4-5-1 or 5-4-1 and we're just doing that. And the players will look at you and go, all right, so he doesn't believe it.
Yeah. Do you know what the perfect example was, John? The game against Liverpool. I was behind the couch thinking, are they going to continually play that ball across the 6-yard area? And honestly, if you're a Spurs fan, you must have bitten your nails off.
Yeah, I mean, I love that insight about believing in it, because if I'm an old-fashioned, I haven't got the coaching badges and that, I've read coaching books and all that, and I'm in awe of people who come out and explain the game and have these marvellous kind of formations and the way they get it and transitions and how we get out of this. And if you watch Postecoglou Celtic, on many occasions they scored very late on, and they didn't score very late on the way a Hugh McDonald team would have said would score late on, which is playing against St Johnstone and say, right, let's get 3 forwards on and Carter Vickers and whoever launch it. Right?
Yeah.
Because we've got to get a goal here or we're not winning the league. Yeah. Whereas the goals that they scored, I think McGregor's goal, if you talk about signifying goals, McGregor's goal about a year ago against Aberdeen, at Pittodrie.
Yeah.
Well, Celtic had 101% possession, right? they had. I mean, I don't think Aberdeen just didn't have the ball at all. Goodwin was slaughtered by it, but Goodwin had done another thing that a manager. Goodwin had given his team the best chance of getting the result, and he said, if we have the ball, that's not the best chance to get it, because they'll take off us, and they'll take off us in bad areas. So we're just going to play the way we played. And it comes to, but Celtic don't start listening. Celtic's supposed to have been sitting in front of that screen, screaming at them. This time added on, and you're still going wide, coming out into transition, playing it out wide, coming back. And one wee thing creates that bit of space. Forrest's flick, bang, that's it, domino.
Is that the one at the edge of the box?
The edge of the box, he shoots.
Because they'd had about, if you watched the game, they'd had about 3 or 4 times where that edge of the box actually fallen to Greg Taylor.
Aye.
And he hadn't got the shot off, or he'd missed it, and you could see it coming. You go, that's going to fall to Callum McGregor at some point.
Yeah,
because they're working that space. That little space. Everything he does is that space
there,
the edge of the box, an entry
so
points down there. And how many times did you see Kyogo score tap-ins? No. Because he plays that. It's about getting the entry point in there and drilling that ball across. And he's got a way of it, and he convinces people. That's what I mean. Listen, I was down in Melbourne. I went down there and stayed for a while and spoke to people. He creates this army of disciples, people who've worked with him.
Is it almost Pep-esque?
Yes, in its way, in a very different way, because he's not quite, he's not the young thruster who played at the highest level and everyone loves Pep because of the whole Cruyff thing. He's kind of built it all off his own back. But the people that have worked with him, I went out to Nunawading FC, which is the youth.
It's a big one.
Oh, aye. Tucked in behind the Tally-Ho Scout Troop Hall in Forest Hill. It was about 3 trams and a bus to get there, right out. And the guy there, that's where they've got the mural on the wall with Pep, Cruyff and Ange. And the guy there, he talked about the things Ange was doing with the under-10s when he was there, playing out from the back, rolling it across the 6-yard box, and constantly. And it was stuff that the guy that who runs the club, who'd played at a decent level, and he said it's training I had never seen before.
Wow.
Right, he says, and so I'm like, well, I want to be part of this. Let's get on it. So he was no surprised, and he said he's got this army of disciples. Everyone you spoke to who worked with him said, "Oh, listen, he was revolutionary," or his utter belief, his no nonsense approach, getting up and when he was a young coach, assistant coach, getting up and taking the microphone on the bus and absolutely slaughtering the team for letting the manager down.
Yeah.
Like they were cleaning blood off the windows for weeks after it,
I'm really looking forward to reading it.
You should be. It's a terrific book.
And the other thing about it is, by reading it, John, obviously I think we will get a chance to maybe talk to you about it in greater detail.
No worries.
Which is something I'd like to do, and we're certainly going to give it away as a book. Just briefly, can he work his magic? Will it be Palm Sunday and Tottenham winning the league, or is this all going to end in tears? You know what happened with the disciples?
Yes. I think they can win the league, I suppose, but it just seems odd to say that because you just expect Manchester City to win the league, and you certainly don't expect.
Do you believe in him?
I believe his type of football works. Right. Having seen enough of it.
There you are. Can you believe it? Hello, Ange. Yeah.
Tell him to get off.
Yeah,
mate.
So you think he's top 4 definitely?
I think he's definitely the real deal. When we come back to the Steve Clarke thing as well, experience. The guy who's nearly 60.
Okay, we'll just get time to fit it in. We're in the last couple of minutes. Top 10 bowlers who failed to live up to the hype in Scotland. I'll give you 10. The majority of them are Scottish, to give me a bit of leeway here in case I've forgotten someone, but that's where you can contribute as well. Islam Farouz, Karamoko Dembele. I must admit, the next one I'm going to mention to you, I'm uneasy about it, John Fleck, because John's had a good career and I like him as a player. David Goodwillie, Scott Allen, Ryan Gauld, Tony Watt, Gary O'Connor, Derek Riordan, Ryan Kent. Is there anybody else you can think of, Hugh?
Well, I've mentioned, Ollie Burke coming here and him not. But the great thing about all these guys is that there's a right few in that list who will have made millions out of this game and have really. I mean, like Ryan Gauld, for example. Okay, he went away, and people say, well, he didn't. He's not going to be in Steve Clarke's plans. I think it's safe to say for the Euros. But what a life he's had. I mean, he's played in Portugal, played in Vancouver, great life experience, been a terrific player for these clubs as well. Gary O'Connor went to Moscow, so Tony Watt on his deathbed will
look back at the goal. I know.
What would a normal player who supports a club give for that goal?
There's a get out. There's a get out of the defence in every one of them. Maybe not so much for Farouz and Dembele, almost certainly, but certainly for the rest of them, there's a get out because they all have had careers which have given them a living, and that is the most important thing about football. Yep. It is a living. Is there anybody else I missed, John? And by the way, I think for me, of all those players, I look and I say Scott Allen. I loved him as a player. Could play the ball forward. I think medical reasons is why he, more than anything else, didn't achieve everything that we wanted him to achieve.
I think the problem is that players are defined by people outside as well, and the expectations are defined by people outside. I will come back to it right after France '98. We came back and Craig Brown had a little briefing sitting around a table, and he said, I think I'm going to build the next squad around Paul Dalglish and Mark Burchill, right? And that was it, and that was his hope, because he came away from that World Cup thinking, if we just had, we had good strikers by modern standards, but if we had a real world-class striker, and he thought they were going to be, so no fault of their own, those boys are suddenly held up as being, these are going to be the Scotland strikers of the future. And again, both have had good careers. Paul has been over in the States and he's won championship rings, he's been a manager, he's done all that. Birchie's done everything, done lots in the game, but they couldn't live up to that hype.
No,
that wasn't them putting that hype up. Farouz and Dembele are the two. I remember watching both of them as young players, and you watch Farouz, I'd say it was an under-18s game, and he was 14 or something at Tynecastle, and you just thought, yep, real deal. He can do absolutely anything he wants in this game, and same with Dembele. I remember Ruud Gullit picking out Karamoko Dembele. We were up at the Dunhill Links Championship golf, and the boy, everyone thinks we must have tricked Ruud into saying this.
Yes.
But he was just chatting and we were talking about, what about the Scottish football scene? And he went, oh, the young kid that played for Celtic, 21s or whatever, Dembele, I've seen him, what a player he is. He can go as far as you want. I played for Feyenoord at age 16 or something. He should be following these footsteps. So sometimes it's not their fault. They just get tagged with these things. And to be tagged at that early age, to be burdened with that potential, it's incredibly difficult to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. You could probably add a few more. You could probably argue about the ones we put there. It was all about a little bit of a pub debate. We like putting in top 10s, top 5s. Thoroughly enjoyed having John Greechan here. We'll talk more about his book. But if you see it in all the good bookstores, Revolution, Ange Postecoglou, it will give you a tremendous insight into what makes the man tick. And, of course, all the disciples that John's talking about. Will he go on to eventually have the success in England that he had in Scotland? All open to debate. Hopefully you've enjoyed the show. There's lots more. There's a variety of programming on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel now, and thank you for your tremendous support, not only for the Journos, but of course our Straight Talk, the football show, the women's football show, as well as our coverage of the news right across the website and YouTube. And if you download the app, all the breaking news is at your fingertips. Thanks for listening and watching today's show.